Mark had seen too much to believe in second chances. At 42, the former soldier carried scars deeper than the ones on his skin, memories of war that woke him at night, guilt over lives he couldn't save, and a quiet anger at the world that had moved on without him. He'd come home years ago, but home didn't feel like it used to. The small town he'd grown up in seemed foreign now, its cheerful bustle a reminder of how disconnected he'd become. He'd tried to fit back in, taking odd jobs, fixing cars, hauling lumber, but nothing stuck. Friends drifted, family stopped pushing, and Mark let them. He lived in a rundown cabin at the edge of town, where the silence was both comfort and curse. His days were routine: coffee, work, sleep, repeat, with no room for dreams. He didn't talk about the past, didn't see a future. The war had taken that from him, or so he thought. One rainy evening, walking back from a late shift, he heard a faint sound, a whimper, weak but persistent, coming from a ditch by the road. He almost kept going. He wasn't one for strays, human or otherwise. But the sound tugged at him, a plea he couldn't ignore. He stepped closer, peering through the mud and shadows, and saw her. A dog, small and soaked, her fur matted with dirt and blood. One leg was twisted, her eyes wide with fear, but she didn't growl, didn't run. She just looked at him, shivering, like she'd been waiting for someone to show up. Mark didn't know dogs, didn't have the patience for them. But he couldn't leave her there. He knelt, expecting her to snap, but she stayed still, letting him lift her carefully. She was light, too light, her ribs sharp under his hands. He carried her home, rain dripping off them both, telling himself he'd just patch her up, then figure out what to do. At the cabin, he set her on an old blanket, rummaging for a towel, some bandages from an old kit. She watched him, quiet, as he cleaned her wounds, her eyes never leaving his face. He didn't know if she'd make it. She looked half gone already, but he kept going, talking to her in a low voice, not sure why. He called her Scout, maybe because she seemed like a survivor, scouting her way through whatever had left her in that ditch. The past still haunted him, flashes of gunfire, faces he'd lost. But tending to Scout gave his hands something to do, his mind a moment's rest. He'd built walls around his heart, thick and high, after years of pain. Trust was a risk he didn't take, not anymore. Yet here was this dog, abandoned and broken, leaning into his touch like she had no reason to doubt him. He didn't know how to fix her, didn't know if he could fix himself, but for the first time in years, he wanted to try. Scout's breathing steadied as she curled up, her warmth spreading through the blanket. Mark sat back, watching her sleep, and felt something shift. Just a crack, but enough to let a sliver of light through. He didn't believe in fate, didn't think life handed out miracles. But maybe, just maybe, this dog was more than chance. He'd keep her alive, keep showing up and see where it led. He had no idea she'd show him a way out of the dark. If Mark's loneliness and Scout's quiet trust stirred something in you, if you've ever felt stuck in your own past, hit the like button now. It's a nod to everyone finding a reason to move forward, just like Mark's starting to. Subscribe to join a community that believes in healing, where stories like this remind us there's always a path ahead. Stay with us to see how Scout changes everything. You won't want to miss it. What's helped you through a tough moment? Share in the comments. Mark woke each morning to Scout's quiet presence, her soft whine pulling him from the haze of restless sleep. The war's shadows, gunfire echoes, faces he couldn't forget, still clung to him, but tending to the injured dog gave his days a shape they hadn't had in years. She was tougher than she looked, that little mutt, her twisted leg healing slowly under his clumsy care. He'd rigged a splint from wood scraps, fed her bits of his own meals, and built a crate lined with old shirts. Scout didn't ask for much, just watched him with steady eyes, her tail giving a faint wag when he spoke. Mark wasn't used to being needed, not since he'd come back and pushed everyone away. He'd lost trust in the world, in himself, after too many missions gone wrong. Yet here was this dog, abandoned and hurt, leaning into him like he was worth something. It stirred a feeling he didn't want to name, Not yet. He started spending hours with her, teaching her to hobble around the cabin, coaxing her to eat more. She'd limp after him, stubborn, refusing to stay down, and he'd catch himself chuckling, a sound he barely recognized. He'd talk to her about nothing, fixing the truck, the weather, avoiding the past. But Scout's calm gaze made it easier to let things slip. One night he mentioned a friend he'd lost overseas, the words spilling out before he could stop them. Scout just lay there, head on his knee, like it was okay to say it, okay to hurt. He hadn't told anyone that story, hadn't wanted to, but with her, it didn't feel like weakness. He noticed changes in himself, small but real. He'd linger at the store, chatting with the clerk instead of rushing out. He'd wave to a neighbor, not just nod. Scout's trust, her willingness to follow him despite her own pain, made him wonder if he could trust again, too. Not big things, not yet, but enough to show up for her, for himself. He'd take her outside, letting her sniff the grass, her steps stronger each day. Watching her fight to heal, to live, hit him hard. He'd stopped fighting years ago, let the past bury him. Scout didn't have that choice, and maybe he didn't either, not anymore. He started fixing up the cabin, patching leaks, clearing junk, not for anyone else, but because Scout deserved better than a falling apart home. He'd catch her watching, tail thumping, like she approved. It wasn't a cure, nightmares still came. The guilt didn't vanish. He doubted he could be the man he'd been before the war, didn't even want to be. But Scout didn't care about who he'd been. She saw him now, broken and all, and stayed. That trust was a bridge, fragile but holding, between the man he was and the one he might become. He'd find himself humming sometimes, old songs he hadn't thought of in years, and Scout would tilt her head listening. It reminded him of music he'd played as a kid, back when life felt open. He didn't know where this was going, didn't trust easy roads, but he felt a pull to keep moving, to see what Scout was leading him toward. He'd built walls to survive, but she was digging through them, one paw at a time, and he wasn't sure he wanted to stop her. Each day, he'd check her leg, clean her crate, and sit with her under the porch light, her warmth grounding him. He wasn't healed, wasn't whole, but he was here, and for now, that was enough. Mark's life had started to shift. Around Scout, the abandoned dog he'd pulled from a ditch, her trust, those quiet moments when she'd rest her head on his knee, had cracked the walls he'd built since the war. Walls meant to keep out pain, guilt, anything that felt too much like hope. He wasn't fixed. The nightmares still came, the past still cut deep. But Scout's steady presence, her growing strength, gave him something to hold on to. He'd watch her limp less each day, her eyes brighter, and feel a flicker of pride, not just for her but for himself. He'd kept her alive, maybe kept himself going too. Now they were a team, her following him around the cabin, him humming half-forgotten tunes while she listened. But he wasn't ready for what came next. One afternoon, he took Scout to a clearing near the cabin, a spot where he'd started sitting to think, away from the town's noise. She'd sniff around, chasing scents, her leg nearly healed. That day, she froze, ears perked, staring at a patch of brush. Mark thought it was a squirrel, but Scout darted forward, precise, and nudged something, a small lost backpack wedged under roots. He opened it, finding a kid's drawings, a name scribbled inside. It belonged to a boy from town, one Mark vaguely knew had gone missing on a hike with his family. He turned it in at the sheriff's office, Scout trotting beside him, and word spread fast. The boy's parents were frantic. The bag was a clue, proof he'd been nearby. They asked Mark to join a search, saying Scout had a nose for finding things. He froze. Helping a dog was one thing. Helping people meant risking failure, letting them down like he'd done too many times overseas. His instinct was to say no, to retreat. But Scout looked up at him, tail steady, like she knew something he didn't. Against every urge to pull back, he agreed. The search was tense, hours stretching under gray skies, Mark following Scout as she sniffed trails others missed. He doubted himself, feared he'd misread her, but then she stopped, barking, sharp and clear. There, in a shallow gully, was the boy, cold but alive, curled up under a tree. Mark called it in, his voice rough, and carried the kid to safety, Scout at his heels. The town buzzed, parents sobbing, neighbors clapping Mark's shoulder, calling Scout a hero. He wanted to shrug it off, uncomfortable with the attention, but something else hit him. Scout wasn't just a stray, she had a gift, a knack for tracking, for finding what was lost. He learned from a local trainer that her breed, whatever mix she was, often had that instinct, sharpened by survival. It wasn't chance, she'd been waiting to show it. The sheriff mentioned a volunteer group, search and rescue, that needed dogs like her, people like him. Mark's first thought was to refuse. He wasn't a leader, wasn't whole enough to take that on. The past screamed he'd fail, let someone die again. But Scout nudged his hand, her nose warm, and he saw the boy's face, safe because of her, because of them. This wasn't the war. This was now a chance to do something right. He didn't say yes right away, but he took the trainer's number, his mind turning. Scout had found more than a backpack, more than a kid. She'd found a piece of him he thought was gone. He wasn't ready to trust the world, but he trusted her, and that was enough to consider stepping forward, to see where her gift could take them both. Mark stood in the open field, Scout bounding through the grass, her once injured leg now strong, her bark sharp and joyful. The cabin wasn't a hideout anymore, it was a home. Its patched roof and cleared yard a mirror of the man he'd become. The war's weight, guilt, loss, nights lost to memory, hadn't vanished, but it didn't rule him now. Scout had changed that, her gift for finding what was lost, pulling him into a life he'd never expected. After the search that saved a boy, word of Scout's talent spread, and Mark had said yes to the volunteer group, training her for search and rescue missions. They'd worked together, her nose leading them to hikers, kids, even a lost dog once. Each success a brick in a new foundation. The town saw them differently now. Mark wasn't the loner veteran. He was the guy with the dog who showed up when it mattered. People waved, stopped to talk, invited him to barbecues. He didn't always go, but he didn't always say no either. Scout had a way of easing him into it, her wagging tail a bridge to folks he'd kept at arm's length. They'd started a community program too, Marky and a few others, training dogs and handlers, sharing what Scout taught him. It wasn't big, just local, but it mattered. Families came to learn, kids played with Scout, and Mark found himself teaching, his voice steady, telling stories of rescues, not battles. The group raised funds, built a small training ground, and named it after Scout, though Mark insisted she didn't care about fame, just a good bone. He'd watch her work, precise and tireless, and feel a quiet pride, not the kind that shouts, but the kind that settles deep. His past wasn't gone. He still woke sometimes, heart racing, ghosts close. But now, he'd pet Scout, hear her soft huff, and the dark would loosen its grip. He'd started playing music again, too. Nothing fancy, just strumming a guitar on the porch. Scout sprawled nearby, tilting her head at the notes. It wasn't about being the kid he'd been, dreaming of stages. It was about feeling alive, here, now. One evening, the boy they'd saved, now grown stronger, ran up at a high community fair, hugging Scout, thanking Mark with a grin. His parents followed, offering a photo they'd framed, Mark and Scout in the woods, the moment they'd found him. Mark took it, throat tight, and hung it in the cabin, not as a trophy but as a truth. He'd done something good. The town had rallied around them too, raising money for gear, spreading their story online, calling Scout a hero. Mark didn't love the spotlight, but he let it shine on her. She'd earned it. He'd walk with her at dusk, her leash loose, and think about the man he'd been, cut off, certain he'd never belong. Scout hadn't just found lost things. She'd found him, shown him he could build something new. He didn't need to erase the war. It was part of him, always would be, but it wasn't all of him. He'd thank her sometimes, a quiet word as she chewed a stick for trusting him when he didn't trust himself. The field stretched wide, Scout chasing a butterfly, and Mark smiled, peace settling like dust after a storm. He'd found a purpose, not in forgetting the past, but in living beyond it with a dog who'd chosen him as much as he'd chosen her. Mark and Scout's story proves that even the heaviest past can lead to a brighter future. If their journey from pain to purpose moved you, hit the like button. It's a cheer for everyone finding their way, just like Mark did. Subscribe to join a community that celebrates these bonds, where stories of hope rise strong. Share this video with someone who needs a lift. Let's spread this light together. What's a moment that helped you rebuild? Share in the comments.